I'm just going to start just calling you Lieutenant. We have some calls. We'll take those in a second. Steve is in this morning to talk about what happened in Tulsa. And, of course, rioting last night in North Carolina. But the in particular, let's start with what happened in Tulsa.
Sure.
So there is 2 officers. There's a man. He's out. It seems like he's put his hands in the air. He then doesn't follow commands, goes back to his car. At one point, it looks like he's reaching back into the car, but the window is up. There might be some PCP or other drugs involved. A taser, an officer shoots him with a taser. The female officer, who seemed quite experienced, shot and killed the man. White officer, black man. What do you make of that story?
Well, I think really the only information we have now is what we've seen between the 2 videos, the dash cam and then the helicopter. So we've got to break it down from what we see. So the first part, you see the helicopter hover over the top, and you see the subject start to walk.
Is that a media helicopter?
No, that was police helicopter.
Okay.
He starts to walk away with his, and then he puts his hands up, or they're already up, and she starts to sort of walk after him. And it looks like her gun is drawn already. So I ask, the officer in me says, okay, why that interaction, and why does she have her gun out?
Right.
So something happened there. Whether it was verbal or physical, I have no idea.
I think the car was stopped right in the middle of
the road.
Middle of the road.
It was a disabled car, I believe.
Yeah.
I believe that's why the officers responded, because they had a call of a disabled vehicle in the middle of the road.
Yeah, and I will, before I get back to the explanation, I will caution people. Please don't read too much into why the police initially interact with someone, because I've been on so many calls that were mundane, boring, nothing calls that turned into violence.
Yeah.
So you can't just read into, say, oh, it was a shoplifting and it turned into this, or you have to forget that, because things can change.
How can someone be shot because they stole a piece of pizza?
Right, and you have to ignore all that, because it can change in 2 seconds.
Right.
And
it's
that's
probably
the
an unfair comparison.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't even look at that, because it's insignificant, really.
It's awful that it's something so minor
absolutely
led to something.
No doubt. But I've also been on calls with gun calls and robbery calls that ended very peacefully.
Right.
So the 2 don't equate.
Right.
So he starts to walk away. So I have to ask, okay, what was it that first caused that interaction?
Yeah.
So was there a reason for her to draw her gun to begin with? In other words, was he threatening verbally or physically? So he starts to walk away. So she's by herself initially. She doesn't activate her camera, which might not be unusual if she thinks it's just a disabled vehicle.
It's now law in Charlotte, but they're saying it's just being implemented, and officers really aren't that well trained on them at this point anyway.
Right, well, in Tulsa, right.
Oh, the Tulsa
Well,
stuff.
I don't know what their protocols are.
Got
So, is it, do you have to turn on every time you interact with somebody, or is it only if it's a negative interaction?
Right.
So if it's just a disabled vehicle, she might not have a reason to activate it to begin with.
Okay.
So, and it looks like it's a dash cam. It's not a body cam. Remember that. So these dash cams are a little bit different. So he starts to walk away. She starts to walk. So now the second where the officer now has his lights and sirens on, his camera's activated. So now we see the dash cams actually from his car, the second officer to show up, or the third officer. So now initially she's by herself. So he starts to walk towards the car. She's got her gun out. She's presumably giving orders to stop or get down on the ground or whatever. Just guessing there. Now the other officer comes up, and now it looks like a third officer or fourth officer. So it looks like he starts walking towards his car. And I heard today that his window was up.
Window was up, yeah. You could see the window was up.
Through the window, right.
But if he's drugged out, he wouldn't know that probably.
Maybe.
We don't know.
Maybe. So I think there's a lot of possible scenarios here. One of which I talked about during the break was one officer had a taser, one had a handgun out. They're standing next to each other, within inches of each other, and it looks like from it gets drowned out by the sort of the officers there. You can't really see it, but it looks like the officer fires the taser, because you start to see the subject sort of lean to the right and go down a little bit, and then almost simultaneously the female officer fires a shot. I think one of the possible scenarios could be when he fired the taser, she took that as him firing a handgun and seeing a threat, and she fired as well. Tasers, if you've ever fired one or been around one being fired, when they initially are fired, do sound like a small caliber handgun. I've fired one many times.
She might have heard the shot and
sort of a sympathetic
reacted.
reflex to him. In other words, in her mind, she perceives, there's a threat.
He's seeing something I can't see. He fires. I have to fire
and
too.
we've seen this happen many times in military and law enforcement, where One officer fires and another one fires.
Again, this is a story that there's still, while it looks, again, another case, while it looks completely obvious, he's got his hands up in the air, and she shot him with his hands up in the air. But that's not true. That isn't what happened. As he walks away, his hands clearly were down, and he's not listening, and he's reaching. So you're now in a very, very difficult position. You've got somebody with the police have their guns drawn on you, and you're making quick movements. Anything could happen at that point.
Right, and it's very easy to second guess it and watch the video. I've watched it a million times.
Yeah.
And we have the luxury of sort of watching it
over and over.
Not real life as it's happening. Could they have done things differently? Absolutely, they could have. And you look at it and you critique it, which is what we have to do in law enforcement to make sure that our standards improve as we go along.
Yeah.
You can critique it. You can say, geez, they should have just backed away, or maybe they could have gone, hands-on and tried to take him down. There were several officers there. But the question is, does she know there were several officers? She's got her back to the other officers.
Right.
She's tunnel vision right on
situation.
him. Does she know how many officers are there? Because initially she's by herself.
Something else to note on this case. This is a pretty experienced female police officer who is also experienced when it comes to recognizing someone that's under the influence of drugs, especially drugs like PCP. Also, they're reporting that she was at an all-black high school event last week. She's somebody that works with the community. This is not a racist officer. And this, again, is a story that's just blowing way out of control, and all the details aren't in yet. And that's the scary part here right now.
Right. I think that's what it is. I think you need to get some more information.
Yeah.
You need to.
We're reacting before we get the details.
Right. And again, you understand because, the videos, and we've talked about the videos many times. I think there's great aspects of
show
having
a lot.
video
Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're deceiving.
They just don't tell the whole story sometimes.
Carter on the line here for Lieutenant Hauck. Go ahead, Carter.
Yes, sir. With all due respect, I won't mention anything about cases, the blame game, or race.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, Dave, you can just hang up on him. Dave, you're not allowed to call into the radio program. You know that. You're not allowed to contact the program or the people here. So
it's kind of a legal matter, David. You know better. Harmony on the line right now. Good morning, Harmony. I got about a minute right now, and I know you have a lot to say, but go ahead.
And it touches on the subject that you're talking about right now in Tulsa. This is the first I've been hearing about this.
Yeah.
Because I've been out. But we had an issue on Noy Street in West Utica, on and around Noy Street. We have a lot of adolescents. We have a lot of adults, primarily from the black community, that are creating a lot of havoc. And I say that not as a racist, because by all means I'm not a racist. I am also, just like you said about the female officer, a community member, and I'm actively involved with the black community. I live in the black community. So, what I'm trying to present here, I put a post on Facebook if people want to check it out. There was somebody who posted a very foolish comment, which created a lot of distraction from the media.
So I'm gonna first of all, I'm gonna have to have you pick up the phone because I'm having a hard time hearing you. You're kind of phasing in and out. I think you might be on speaker, but sit tight. I'm gonna take a quick news break, which will then allow us to kind of dig into your story here, Harmony, in a second. So sit tight.